Hello, everyone. Are you able to hear me at the moment?
Yeah, Andrew, we can hear you.
Okay, great. I just wanted to let you guys know I just put a message in the chat. They're having some technical difficulties in conference room B, so we might have a slight delay to the start. But is everyone seeing the PowerPoint slide?
I see it. I've got you up on my iPad right now, Andrew, while Sarah's working with IT.
Okay, well, we'll give IT a minute. I think we could still continue with the meeting, just if they're unable to resolve the issue that they're looking at, but we'll give them a minute or so to let them try to resolve that.
Sounds good.
I keep trying here, because this is what Jake taught me to do, is just use the tablet. And then, I don't know, like I can't seem to get the computer screen was up there for a sec, and now it's not responding at all.
Maria, you might want to mute yourself.
Sure.
For those that had just joined, they're having a little bit of technical difficulties in conference room C, so we're going to have a slight delay to the start of our meeting. Yes.
We're still having technical issues. However, I just emailed the agenda to the people that are the task force members that are here in the room. So they can all watch the presentation on their phones, and you can go ahead and get started in just a minute.
Okay.
So that is something.
And I'm muting now.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, for anyone else, I think everyone in the room was there a few minutes ago when I made that announcement. We'll go ahead and get started with today's task force meeting. Our primary focus in our discussion will be retail sales permitting and regulations with a limited scope as directed by the Board of Supervisors. But we'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. And our agenda for today, we'll be going through a welcome, a roll call of task force members, the consideration of minutes from the January 23rd, 2023 task force meeting, and then consideration of recommendations on cannabis retail sales permitting process and limitations on concentrations of cannabis retail sales, concentrations or locations. And then we will have public comment, and then we will adjourn. So for a roll call of our task force members, do we have William Weiss?
He's present.
Will Weiss is present. Jan Coppinger?
Present, waiting to get into the Zoom room.
Okay. Catherine Vanderwall?
Present.
Rebecca Harper?
She is not in the conference room.
Okay, I'm not seeing her online either at the moment. We'll see if she joins us here soon. All right, Jennifer Smith?
I'm online.
Nara Dalbaca?
I'm here.
Robert Geary?
Here.
And a representative from our fire districts.
Yeah, we have Fire Marshal Paul Blues and Chief Cepeda.
All right, thank you, everyone. Okay, moving on to the consideration of minutes from the Cannabis Ordinance Task Force meeting. Maria, I'm going to go ahead and let you take this one here.
Great. Has everybody had a chance to go over the minutes? If we're ready, then I'll entertain a motion.
I actually had some questions and a few things that I just kind of wanted to go over kind of regarding the minutes and the few topics from last meeting. That's all right.
Super. Go ahead, Paul.
All right. So the first one is just looking at when you get to section 5, consideration of recommendations, and then line item 1, the proposed no change to the definition of ag, only because it was kind of brought to my attention and asked by some of the fire chiefs. Just confirming that we are not making the temporary hoop houses for cultivation ag exempt structures, correct?
That's correct. The ag exempt structure currently only allows for storage of like feed stuffs or farming implements.
Okay, perfect.
Not a place of habitation or cultivation.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. And then the second item that I wanted to talk about was number 5 under that same section, the conformance to California Public Resource Code 4290 and 4291. only because we talked about it last time and I didn't want to say anything until I had kind of done some research. So I looked into it a little bit. The public resource codes kind of fall under the same jurisdiction and authority that the fire code or the building code would, in the sense that for like the fire code, we can only make it more restrictive. We can't make it more lenient. Public resource code is the same way. We can only make it more restrictive. We can't make it more lenient than what it already is. I looked into the 4290 and 4291 standards because we were talking about the agricultural standards. There is no such thing as 4290 and 4291 agricultural standards. It specifically covers residential, commercial, and industrial standards. So if the product is considered ag instead of commercial, then it's not required to fall under 4290 and 4291 standards. If it's going to be labeled as a commercial product, then it has to adhere to the 4290 and 4291 standards. So there is no such thing as a 4290 agricultural, just to kind of clarify that. The only other things that I kind of wanted to go into, because I know that there was also some talk about the map that I drew up for the proposal for the hoop houses, and I did a little bit more research into that. And even with 4290 and 4291 aside, the California Fire Code, the 2022 edition, kind of addresses minimum distances and spacing. And in Chapter 31 for your tents, Section 3103.8.1 goes over access. Fire apparatus access roads shall be provided in accordance with Section 503. 503, there's multiple bullet points in there. I can get copies of that over later if people would like to see it. But it essentially says that at any point in time from any structure, the minimum travel distance from any point of that structure to a fire department access road can be no greater than 150 foot. It also goes into the dimensions for the road width not be less than 20 feet. And then for another section under tents, 3103.8.6 goes into fire breaks. And this is specifically for tents and membrane structures. An unobstructed fire break passageway or fire road not less than 12 feet wide and free from guy ropes or other obstructions shall be maintained on all sides of all tents and membrane structures unless otherwise approved by the fire code official. So I know there was a little kickback last meeting about, the 3-foot clearance and then this 10-foot access road around that whole proposal and everything along those lines, but it's to code and it's to fire code, and it's something that we feel like would kind of really benefit the cannabis industry, being able to get that reduced clearance and make it an aisleway in between those houses while still maintaining true to the code and not violating anything in the code as well.
Okay, thank you. Let's open that up for discussion.
So,
And, sorry, Paul, did you have any other section of the minutes? Or is it just that number 5?
It was number 5 with the 4290 and the 4291, and then I just wanted clarification on that first item.
Okay. So we're not ready for a motion. Let's see. Is there any other task force member who would like to speak to that item?
yeah, I have my hand raised, Chief Cepeda. So for clarity for the fire chiefs, is we really need to know what our county ag commissioner is defining cannabis. If she's going to define it as ag, it changes what we can, have authority over versus it being a commercial product. So we really need for her to put that in writing for us so that, we're spending a lot of time with a consideration of it being a non-ag commercial product. So if she can define that, of course, it gives us some marching orders.
Actually, the county has already taken a position, as well as the state, that this is an agricultural product.
Okay, can we get a copy of that for my next chiefs meeting?
Sure thing.
Awesome, thanks.
Catherine, if she's listening, can you make a note that we need to get that compiled and sent over to Chief Cepeda? And product. Okay. Are there any other task force members who care to address number 5 on the minutes? Okay, we'll open it up to the public. Aaron?
Yeah, am I unmuted?
I can hear you.
Awesome, thank you. Erin McCarrick in Clear Lake. And thank you for the input from the fire department and the task force in general. I was under the impression that I know that there were some folks who got permitted at the county, and they had been abiding by those rules already, where the ag that you didn't have to have 4290 rows going to their facility because it was ag and there wasn't like a processing facility on there, nothing industrial, just like, you know, a vineyard versus a tasting room. And since we don't necessarily have tasting rooms, that it'd be considered ag. So just wondering about clarification of that. I thought we've been abiding by those already, but thanks again for the input and the flexibility as we learn how to do this and how the state continues the definition. But yeah, it is defined as ag. So thanks again.
Andrew, do you have that resolution number offhand that gave that ag exemption?
I do not actually at the moment.
Okay.
But that was a resolution from 2019. And my understanding from what I can see at our records that various chief building officials that have been through our department haven't always been entirely consistent with their interpretation of 4290 requirements. I know one chief building official, I forgot his name at the moment. He was there before I came to the department. He was not concerned with 4290 when it came to a proposal for outdoor with no new structures added or no structures in general. So that is my understanding. That could be the source of some of that. But let's see if I can go back and find that resolution. I'll let the conversation go on while I look for this. So.
Andrew, Maria, this is Paul again.
Yes, Paul.
I've got the 4290 standard right here. And it says these regulations apply to the perimeters and access to all residential, commercial, and industrial building construction within state responsibility areas approved after January 1st, 1991, and within lands classified and designated as very high fire hazard severity zones. So it mentions nothing about ag. I Googled nonstop last week trying to find something about ag in 4290, and it just doesn't, I can't find anything. I ended up making phone calls to even get this far with it. So
Right. Okay, thank you. I see Chief Cepeda's hand up.
Yeah, so the gal that was talking before you, she had brought up about tasting rooms. Tasting rooms are, so I'm hoping we're not confusing a tasting room with what they are going to want to do in the cannabis industry, because tasting rooms fall under our inspections and permitting process. So I know that we're talking ag, but we're talking grapes. Their tasting rooms are conforming to our regulations and statutes and permitting processes. So I just want to make sure that we're not.
Yeah, I don't think we're looking at them similarly as far as land use goes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, Bart and Aaron, your hand is still up. I don't know if you left it up or if you are back in line again. Well, let's go on to Bart. Hey, Bart, you want to unmute? At least I think it's Bart. Phone number ending in 7257. There you go. Oh, you're muted again. All right. Looks like Bart's having technical difficulties. Who is having difficulties today? So what do we want to do with this group?
Maria, just to answer that first question, it was resolution number 2019-124.
And could you read the title of that resolution, please?
Resolution adopting recommendations to address fire safe regulations applicable to outdoor cannabis cultivation.
Okay. And what was the gist of that? Because that's the one that we should be following right now since it's still current.
It was item number 2 from the recommendations that it is the recommendation of this board to the county fire official and to all fire protection districts in Lake County that outdoor cannabis cultivation be recognized as an agricultural activity in the application of Public Resource Code Section 4290 and 4291 and the SRA fire safe regulations, subject to the same requirements imposed upon and the exemptions allowed for any other agricultural activity.
Super. Would you forward that over to Chief Cepeda and to Paul too, so they have it for their fire chiefs meeting?
Absolutely.
Excellent. Okay, Willie, let me know. Chief Cepeda, let me know if there's anything else that would satisfy that. But we can do that offline. For the good of the group now, what would we like to do? Ready to entertain a motion if you're ready to adopt it. If we need amendments, let me know.
Motion to adopt the minutes.
Okay, motion made by Jan Coppinger. Do we have a second?
I want to clarify that motion, actually. Sorry.
Go ahead, Will.
Clarifying that motion is to accept and file with the additions that Paul brought up. Or clarification on item.
It wasn't as amended.
We could do it as amended, but does as amended really represent what we spoke about last meeting? I mean, or is this a new thing? I don't remember.
That's a fair point.
I don't remember that discussion in the minute. I mean,
Well,
minutes. But
Right. The information that Paul gave us today was stuff that took him time to find. He was trying during that meeting, but yeah.
my motion is to adopt the minutes as written, and we may have to discuss Paul's.
but of course, accepting the minutes is not action upon what we discussed last meeting anyway, right? It's just the minutes themselves.
Well, yes, but however, keep in mind that the minutes do include those recommendations that that Catherine and I will take to the Ag Advisory Committee. So we good? We got a motion to approve minutes as presented. Do we have a second?
Yeah.
I second that.
Okay, second by Jennifer Smith. All in favor? Aye. Is there anybody opposed? Let's do that. If you're opposed, I think we have a
Yes,
down.
I've just gotten in. I have a comment to make.
Sure, go ahead, Bart.
Yes, I have a disagreement with the minutes as they are stated. And I want to say that both Catherine Vanderwaal and one of the planning commissioners has publicly said in meetings that they do not consider cannabis to be determined officially as ag. And my comments in the last agenda were mentioned that I had made a comment, but my comments weren't included. And it's very important that my comments be included, that the fire chiefs do not regard the current regulations as safe enough. I'd like that put forward.
Thanks, Bart. Anybody else? If not, we have a motion and a second on the floor. All in favor? Anybody opposed? All right, we're going to consider that motion carried. Back to you, Andrew.
Okay, thank you, Maria. Moving on with the presentation. We are going to be discussing retail sales today specifically, and we have certain perimeters to stay within. I know the conversation on retail sales can go in a lot of different directions, but on January 10th, 2023, the Board of Supervisors requested recommendations from the Cannabis Ordinance Task Force on retail sales, specifically to discuss the use by right of retail sales, in this case within the C2 Community Commercial Zoning District versus the requirement for a ministerial or discretionary permits, as well as recommendations on the regulation of concentrations or density or any other restrictions on locations of cannabis retail sales. The board initially was starting to request that we complete this within the first quarter of the year. They kind of walked that back and said there's no specific timeline, but they would like for this to take priority as our next topic of discussion. So here we are. Moving on, some background. Currently, cannabis retail sales are only viable in 3 zoning districts. As you can see, the majority of our zoning districts, cannabis retail sales are not currently permitted. In planned development commercial, our zoning ordinance states that allowed uses include those that are allowed in C2. In C1, local commercial districts, cannabis retail sales are allowed with the major use permit. In community commercial district, C2, they are a permitted use or a use by right, which means they are allowed and you would not be required to get a use permit in order to engage in cannabis retail sales. You would still need a license from the state. And depending on which specific parcel that is and any other combining districts, there may be some other requirements. Moving
Hey, Andrew?
on. Yes.
Just 1 second. Jake and Jeff got the meeting booting up, so it's going to take a few minutes, but then I'm going to switch off my iPad, and we'll move to the other one.
Okay.
Should I mute myself?
Go to the previous slide and we'll hold off here.
Andrew, can I ask you a quick question while we're hanging out?
Yeah, actually, well, Nara, I'll let you go ahead and ask a question. And then I do want to remind everyone or request from everyone that usually I like to engage in the dialogue as I move through a presentation. I like that. But in this case, some of the questions that may came up might be addressed in some subsequent slides as we get to them. So we can hold that off. But since we're just here waiting, Nara, what's your question?
I just wanted to clarify whether this is this all cannabis retail that's not permitted, or is this just storefront retail?
Currently, this is for, I believe, all retail sales, because the ordinance as it was written, I think, does discuss retail sales and micro business. And since we've gone back to the slide, I'm kind of glad we did. I want to get back to planned development commercial. While it does say that uses are allowed, the uses that would be allowed in C2 are allowed, planned development commercial projects require a specific plan of development, and that specific plan of development moves through community development as a major use permit. So anything you're doing in planned development commercial generally requires a major use permit. So really the key zoning district of concern at the moment, where the concern from the Board of Supervisors is coming, is for our community commercial districts, our C2 districts, and the fact that retail sales are a use by right there. So I hope that clarified things. How are you guys doing down there in the conference room?
Oh, just Andy. Keep going.
Okay. All right, I will continue. Let me know if you need me to pause. So going on, what we're looking at currently with our retail sales within Lake County in the C1 zoning district, where major uses are, our major use permits are required. We currently have 2 dispensaries. We have Lake County Cannabis Club, which I believe is starting to look at a new name. And we have that is located in Lower Lake. And we have the Driftwood Dispensary, which is now generally known as the Highway Dispensary. Both of those had to go through a major use permit. They have conditions with their approval, and they're involved in the county's, the cannabis programs monitoring program. But yep.
Hey, Andrew, could I just make a note in the record that Rebecca Harper is present at 1:30?
Sure, yes. Okay, moving on. So within our C1 zoning districts, we have 2 cannabis dispensaries that obtained a major use permit. In the C2 zoning district, we are starting to see more dispensaries come in and start to, basically they're pending development. Not all of them. The top one on that list, Green Heron Dispensary, is operating, and it is located near Lakeport, just south of the Lakeport city limit, I believe. So those top 3 in the list are the 3 that are operating. Furthermore, we have 3 others that are pending. Hilux, which is in Lower Lake area. And then we have one going by the name of Pioneer Plaza that is pending operation in Kelseyville, as well as Red Bud Apothecary in Kelseyville. And I believe it was the 2 that are going in to Kelseyville that raised some concerns, and that's why we're discussing it today. In addition to these 6 retail sales operations within the unincorporated areas of Lake County, which is our jurisdiction. There are also 3 dispensaries within the city of Clear Lake and 1 dispensary located on tribal lands, to the best of my understanding. So that is the current state of retail sales. For our discussion at the January 10th, 2023 Board of Supervisor meeting, some of the discussion points that were addressed was the possibility of a buffer zone between retail sales locations, the requirement of a ministerial zoning permit or a discretionary minor use permit for all retail sales. And so for the, to better wrap your head around that, zoning permit is a ministerial process. Basically, an applicant would need to come into the community development department and, fill out the application for the zoning permit. And it's basically going through and checking the boxes that you meet this setback, you're in the correct zone, everything kind of meets it. Once it checks off, then we hand over that zoning permit. And that's what makes it ministerial. For a minor use permit and a major use permit, both of which are discretionary, which means they put in that application and it goes through a process of analysis that includes public noticing. And it's made generally, the minor use permits would go before the zoning administrator in a zoning administrator hearing, and it could then elevate to the planning commission, and major use permits just go straight to the planning commission. Another discussion point would be the options for a maximum number of retailers allowed based on population density. Another point was maintaining the 1,000-foot setbacks from schools, parks, churches, daycare centers, and other sensitive receptors. It was expressed by the Board of Supervisors that they would like to see those setbacks maintained. However, when it comes to retail sales, we don't have very clear local regulations on those setbacks for retail sales, not so much in the way we see with cultivation. Over the past few years, cultivation has gotten all of the attention, and now we're starting to look at the other aspects of the industry. Another topic for discussion would be options for delivery services, a non-retail or non-storefront retail sales, as well as reviewing the state regulations on excessive concentrations, which we will get to next. So when you look at the State of California Department of Cannabis Control regulations for excessive concentrations, the key points here state that in determining whether to grant, deny, or renew a license for a retail premises or microbusiness premises authorized to engage in retail sales, the department shall consider if an excessive concentration exists in the area where the licensee will operate. For the purposes of this section, excessive concentration applies when either of the following conditions exist: the ratio of licensees to population within the census tract or census division in which the applicant premises is located exceeds the ratio of licensees to population in the county in which the applicant premises is located, unless denial of the application would unduly limit the development of the legal market so as to perpetuate the illegal market for cannabis goods. So in a sense, if, by not allowing the dispensaries there would cause people to go to the illegal market, to a drug dealer, they're trying to prevent that because that drug dealer probably has other more illicit drugs, more dangerous drugs that might get, basically exposed to. Anyway, second part of it, and I think this is really where this, the DCC has handed this off to counties, and where certain counties and cities have done exactly what we're about to embark on, is that the ratio of retail licensees or micro business licensees to the population within the census tract, census division, or jurisdiction exceeds that allowable by local ordinance adopted under Business and Professions Code section 26200. So here we are looking at that in terms of setting those local, having a local ordinance that sets that. I did not have the time to look at every county in depth, but I started to look around and see, some of the surrounding counties that are closer in proximity and nature to Lake County, and what restrictions they have. So we'll just go through this list, first starting with counties without concentration restrictions and what they look like. Mendocino County has a population of 91,305 people, based on the latest census data. They currently have a count of 21 dispensaries with a ratio of about 1 dispensary for every 4,347 people. Humboldt County has a population of 136,310 people with 26 dispensaries with a ratio of about 1 per 5,200 people. Del Norte County, a much lower population, 28,100 people. They have 3+. There were 3 that I could identify. My search was not exhaustive, but that's what came up as at an initial search, which gives a ratio of about 1 dispensary for every 9,300 people. And Trinity County, with an even lower population, 16,060 people, have around 3 dispensaries with an estimated ratio of 1 dispensary per 5,353 people. If you look at Lake County currently, with a population of 68,766 people, and in being included in this group of counties without current restrictions on concentrations or locations, we currently have 9 dispensaries in the basically the 9 dispensaries are for the county as a whole, not including the one on tribal lands. And that's a ratio of about 1 dispensary per 7,640 people. When you look at unincorporated Lake County, so you would not be, in this case, not be including the 3 dispensaries within the city of Clear Lake, which I think they have determined that that's the maximum amount of dispensaries they're going to allow. When you look at that, we have 6 dispensaries in unincorporated Lake County, and that would be a ratio of 1 dispensary per 11,461 people. Now, looking at some surrounding counties that do have regulations or restrictions on concentrations, I first started with Yolo County. Their ordinance is interesting in the fact that they allow for 10 storefront retail sales operations and 10 delivery service retail sales operations. So when you look at just the 5 storefront with a population of 216,986, the ratio is about 1 dispensary per 43,397 people. When you look at Yolo County and you incorporate both storefront and delivery, we're looking at 15 total retail operations for a ratio of about 1 retail sales operation per 14,465 people. Next, if you look at Sonoma County, I went straight to the county and their regulations. However, I was later informed after putting this together. I just want to point out that Sonoma County and Santa Cruz County figures are probably a little misleading. Because, for example, Sonoma County, where they have a population of 485,887 people, their current county ordinance restricts retail sales operations to 9. Only 9 stores allowed currently on their website. They say 8 of those 9 are in operation, and they have 1 pending application that has been deemed complete. But with that 9 throughout the county of unincorporated areas of Sonoma County, the ratio looks like it's 1 dispensary per 53,987 people. However, if you look at the fact Sonoma County has up to 33 dispensaries within the incorporated cities of Sonoma County, at which point you would see that those figures are around 1 for every 11,000 people. Santa Cruz, most likely in a similar situation. Their county just allows 12 storefront operations. And with their population, that's about 1 per 22,316. However, I have a strong inclination that that's not factoring in the cities within Santa Cruz County. So moving on, I came across a few other counties that have location restrictions, not so much concerning concentrations, but with buffers and setbacks. Alameda County has a lot of language for their retail sales with a population of 1.6 million. They have buffers and setbacks that vary across the county in different areas from 1,000 feet to 1 mile to 5 miles in their more rural areas, that 5-mile distance between retail operations. In the city of I first started looking at San Francisco County, but the city of San Francisco with a population of 815,201, they've held the old state regulation buffers and setbacks of 600 feet. And those buffers and setbacks both apply to retail sales operations as well as sensitive receptors, including schools, parks, playgrounds, daycare centers, drug recovery facilities, and recreation centers. Okay, moving on, just to give some context across, the broader United States, I looked at the cities with the highest cannabis retail sales concentrations. And at the top of the list was Missoula, Montana, followed by Medford, Oregon, Pueblo, Colorado, Eugene, Oregon, and Denver, Colorado. And those ratios are closer to what we're seeing in Mendocino and Humboldt County. So recommended actions, staff requests the Cannabis Ordinance Task Force provide recommendations regarding cannabis retail sales for the following issues. 1, provide recommendations on the appropriate permitting process. Option 1 could be require a ministerial zoning permit for all retail sales. Option 2, require a discretionary minor use permit for retail sales. Or option 3, to be determined by the task force in case you decide to come up with some other recommendation. And 2, provide recommendations on location limitations for retail sales. A few caveats here. The Board of Supervisors requested that we only focus on storefront retail with or without delivery. They brought that up because they do not want to begin the discussion, or they did not need for us to begin the discussion on micro businesses, where some of our rural cultivation sites incorporate that vertically integrated model that we addressed in our vision statements. And they do not want us to focus on retail. Oh, well, I just said that, sorry. And furthermore, other retail related issues can be reviewed at a later time. So.
And Andrew, I have a question. So as they talk about going through the permitting process, are we guaranteed that those permits, as they are looked at and moving forward, are passed on to the local fire district having jurisdiction?
That would depend. If it's a ministerial zoning permit, I believe they might not necessarily get passed to the fire districts unless we add some language requiring them to. Minor use permits and major use permits would.
Well, I just, as Kelseyville Fire District and my district are the two that employ fire marshals and really focus on that fire safety. We, we definitely like to see any permit that's going to be issued for anything within our district so that we can guarantee that life safety component. We can get that added into the verbiage. That would be great.
And yeah, this is Maria. That's not a problem. When we process zoning permits, even if it doesn't specify that it has to go to a certain department, we'll usually send it to some. For instance, when somebody's doing a special event, we'll shoot that over to the sheriff's office for their input as well. So yeah, that wouldn't be a problem if we were doing the zoning permit. If it's a use by right, as currently is allowed in C2, then there is no review by planning. It just goes straight to a building permit if they need one, but they may not even need that. So that's where we don't have that sort of capture of information stage.
Okay, thank you.
One other thing for your consideration, I had it on a different desktop. I'm going to see if I can pull it up. There was a discussion. This came at us while we were quite busy with other things going on with CDD. But, ideally, I would like to have some of the stuff mapped out. And while I was not able to produce finished maps, I'm going to look and see if I can share my screen to help provide some insight into some of these locations.
Andrew, while you're doing that, let's see if we have any other task force members. Chief Cepeda, I still see your hand up. Are you still wanting to share comment? Okay, we'll move on to Nara.
Yeah, could we go back to the slide with the list of the counties and the
Sure.
couple of things I wanted to address on that list. Okay, great. So just kind of going down the list here, Del Norte County, one of the reasons that they probably don't have that many dispensaries is there are a number of dispensaries right over the border in Oregon where you can get cheaper cannabis with no sales tax. So they may, that may also factor into, to the lower number there. In In Santa Cruz County, yeah, you're correct. There are permitted dispensaries in the city of Santa Cruz, in Watsonville, and I believe, well, I think Pajaro is actually, that's Monterey, but there's a pretty high concentration around the Monterey Bay area as well, in terms of if you're looking sort of regionally. In Alameda County, a lot of the cities work with the state setback, so 600 feet. And Alameda County includes, the cities of Oakland, Berkeley, and Emeryville. Oakland, I think, has going on now close to 30 dispensaries. Emeryville has 3. Berkeley has permitted up to 6. San Leandro has 2 or 3, I believe. So there's a large concentration. The unincorporated areas of Alameda County, what they wanted to do was to ensure that every area of the county was served, which is where that 5 mile buffer came in, because initially it was going to be 1 dispenser, and I think now there's 3 actually. So I'm not sure where it may be up to 12 at some point, but
Okay.
that was the reasoning behind that. Just if I can offer that.
Yeah, I think if I recollect from reviewing their ordinance, the 5 mile were like eastern sections, more rural sections.
Correct. Yeah. So that was trying to hit underserved cities where there are bans. So like the city of Livermore and Dublin Pleasanton area, both. A lot of those cities were under ban, although they're looking at that now. So they were trying to locate dispensaries closer to those areas where it was under ban.
Okay.
Thank you, Mara.
Thank you.
Going forward with discussion, let's actually start with number 1. Just so we don't go bouncing around, and then we'll go on to number 2.
I do have a map available if you guys would like to see it at any given time.
That'll be good when we get to number 2.
Okay.
But now with appropriate permitting processes, do we have any input from the task force?
Well, I would prefer to see it a little tighter than just the ministerial, because I do think dispensaries do run higher risks of just what they can do to the area around it. So I would not go for the number 1, because I think that's a little too loosey-goosey. Anybody just jump in and do it. I think it does need to be looked at pretty close. And we need to I don't want to turn into Eureka. I don't want to turn into just across the Oregon border. It's disgusting, and we don't want Lake County to turn into that. But it was marijuana that did that to Eureka. You can't even, feel safe driving through the town anymore. Dispensaries and pot everywhere. Of course, along came with adult bookstores started popping up. I mean, we just don't want to let that happen. Let's monitor these closely and kind of tight.
Okay, so you're going for discretionary use permit of either a minor or major?
Yep.
All right, we have Robert Geary's hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just concerned about the ministerial, because I know even depending on exactly what it is that they're doing, under ministerial, there's certain things that can happen that make them exempt that could be potentially, that can cause effects, I think, to what's going on. So the ministerial is kind of scary for me because of everything, not knowing exactly what falls underneath that zoning permit.
So you're saying a discretionary use permit, either minor or major?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I have a comment as well. I would think, I know we're discussing number 1 and then getting to number 2.
Yeah.
I would think that if this group decides to put a location limitation, or whether they don't, a ministerial or a discretionary minor or major use permit would give the ability to kind of evaluate a better option versus, you know what I'm saying? And instead of permitting dispensaries, and then if there's a cap on how many there could be, maybe you have 3 crummy ones instead of because of the permitting process. I don't know, but if that makes sense to you.
Okay.
I have a question. Go ahead.
No, I just said that does make sense to me.
I have a question more than a statement at this point, and that is to sort of inquire as to who would be, or rather which permitting process, option 1 or option 2, would involve some degree of evaluation of public safety, not saying that cannabis dispensaries are a public safety issue themselves, but that large value of commodity being sold, potential risk for, there have been break-ins and thefts at places of this type in Sonoma and Mendocino County over the last several weeks that I've read about. And so my thought is simply, and again, I realize we're talking about number 2 next, but I'm kind of curious about what mechanisms exist within option 1 or option 2 for evaluating those types of questions about these retail sales locations, not just on concentration and buffers and what, but like any element of public safety concern. What steps are involved in 1 versus 2? Or is that something you can speak to relatively succinctly, or if that's
Sure, I'll try for succinct. So the zoning permit does not take in any sort of discretionary evaluation. It's merely holding an application up against the set of conditions or the set of standardized criteria to make sure, and just checking things off to make sure that it's meeting the criteria.
So one might otherwise term a ministerial zoning permit as an evaluation, but nonetheless an evaluation based on status quo, versus option 2 would be
option 2, the minor use permit. Now you're getting into conditions of approval, and that's where it goes out for agency review on a more thorough level than just as a ministerial zoning permit. So this is where we send it out to the sheriff, we send it out to the fire, and that's where we gather those inputs and those recommendations that we then combine into the draft conditions of approval.
In which case, I am generally leaning more toward option 2.
Option 2.
Thank you.
Okay. And I said, Jennifer Smith, your hand's up.
Hi, good afternoon. Really important to bring this up as we start to look at, some of the other license types that we're not allowing right now, which is consumption and sales on farms. And some of the other license types that we're looking to discuss through this task force. One of the things that I think to note is it's important to note is that we're seeing this concentration because we do have such limited zoning for this. And right now it is only allowed in with this over-the-counter use permit in the 1 zone. I think if we actually spread it out and had more diversified zoning and maybe the levels of, what do we want to call it? Ranging from ministerial to major use permits, based upon which zoning you were going into, you would have to go through those different steps. So I think if we actually broadened the availability of storefronts available for this, we would see less concentration. I think that we would be able to see more types of retail sales. Our ultimate goal here is to have diversified retail sales and utilizing all the license types that are available from the state to us. And I think that we've created this problem ourselves by limiting it to just the 1 zone. And I think if we opened it up, had those different criteria, we might be able to satisfy this issue in a multiple of ways.
Thank you. Let's see, it looks like Paul and then Chief Cepeda.
Chief Cepeda, so real quick, Will brought up a good point is that if we don't know these facilities are going in, majority of those facilities have hardened their infrastructure. And so we're talking bars on windows, and it creates a lot more challenging for us fire guys to gain access, control a fire, medical aids. If we don't know where these facilities are and have adequate access to get into them after hours or even during work hours. If you look at the majority of these facilities have hardened themselves, and then it decreases our ability to get into and effectively do our job. So, it's just so important for the fire departments to know everything that's going on in our communities. To do a hazard assessment.
So, okay, thank you. Is it safe to see then the fire chief seat goes for option 2?
Yes.
Okay.
I think it's important to note that these are commercial businesses and the fire chiefs are already being involved, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, that the existing dispensaries do have to get sign off by their local fire jurisdictions, correct?
It has always been consistent. A lot of times we find out about it after the fact. So that's what we're trying to work. That's why we set up a group with Bill Collins and the two fire marshals. They meet every month now to reconcile and make sure that we are on track with everything that's going on the unincorporated parts of our districts.
And in C2 zoning district, if they are not making any tenant improvements that need a building permit, then it does not come to planning, it does not go to building. So I would imagine, I'm not aware of any mechanism that would then go to fire.
Okay, understood.
Okay, looks like Jennifer, we did Chief Cepeda, Nara, and then we'll go to public.
Okay. Yeah, so I would like to talk a little bit about sort of an option 3, which would be a hybrid of 1 and 2. I think that given the high fire risk of this area, I think it's important that fire is inspecting. I think it is just retail, but I think having inspections and sign off, it sounds like that would make fire more comfortable, and I think that is something that we have to be aware of and listen to here, because these are the folks we're going to require coming in if there is an emergency. But I think that Lake County has done a good thing here in not restricting and having an RFP process, because I've been involved and seen RFP processes all over the state, and they end up with major lawsuits, sometimes attempted corruption or corruption. And you don't always have the best retailers, because you have the people that are best financed and best able to work an RFP system, and then can come in, and they're often not from the community. They're often looking to sell the asset right away. And Lake County has done this right. And what you have is most of the dispensaries here are locally owned, and community driven. And you've done right there. So I don't want to have us start to look at this attempted restriction, or this restriction having us go backwards, and end up with some of the same issues and problems that some of these other counties that didn't do it as well as you all did. I think there's probably certainly a reaction right now. I think, as Jen said, because of the extremely limited zoning where it's allowed right now, there aren't a lot of places to be, and also there aren't cannabis dispensaries here yet. So it's going to look like, gosh, there's a lot of dispensaries popping up, when really it's just that there aren't any here, and they're popping up in lower numbers than, if we're talking about Kelseyville, much lower numbers than bars and tasting rooms in that same commercial district, and liquor stores in that same commercial district, and restaurants with ABC licenses in that same commercial district. So I think that I understand, people's, alarm that, like, wow, these things seem like they're coming out of nowhere, but this is the beginning of the building of an industry. And Lake County has, like I said, done this right in terms of your uplifting local folks here. So, but I do understand that, that fire, it sounds like fire is not being, brought in. And that sounds like that's something that we could add in, that, like, hey, let's have this be, ministerial and require fire sign off, fire and sheriff sign off. The state has pretty robust requirements for security. I doubt that the county would come up with anything that was more robust than what the state's already requiring in terms of cameras, quality of cameras, security of the walls and the rest of the location. But I'm hearing the concern from fire. That's where I'm at.
Thanks, Nara. So your position then is number 1, ministerial zoning permit, but with added required fire sign off.
Yes, or or potential other discretionary review as discussed by this task force, or specific, if there are specific commercial districts or concerns in a specific commercial district, or I don't know if you have overlay zones, that those might have a higher requirement or another form or a checklist or something like that. But I think gumming up the process and making it more difficult at this point isn't going to serve the county.
Thank you. I think the overlay districts that apply to commercial would only be something like flood. But the scenic combining district does not apply to commercial.
Okay.
Okay, so we have a phone number that ends in 6205. You're next, and then we'll go to Aaron.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much. This is Bart Levinson. I definitely also want fire and sheriff sign-off ability and inspection. We've already heard in the task force from, I believe, NARA, that our local dispensaries want to have future lounges and smoking areas. Ukiah is already applying for that. The reality is that that's likely coming, despite what the Board of Supervisors are saying, oh no, that can all be dealt with later. No, really, it can't. It really has to be dealt with now. And not only do we need to deal with it, the fire chief needs to deal with it, the sheriff needs to deal with it, but the town halls need the ability to hear what is being proposed, to have time to evaluate it, and to offer their town hall consensus. Thank you.
Thanks, Bart. Aaron?
Yeah, hi, Erin, Kara Clear Lake. Calling to actually, I have a question. I'm curious as to what businesses do have to have sign off from the fire department. I know I'm under the jurisdiction of Clear Lake, and we worked closely with our fire department to get our sign off on our building and the restrictions, or not the restrictions, the preservation measures that we have there. And we actually had a manufacturing license, not us, but a business next to us that didn't end up being manufacturing, but it triggered needing a 55,000 gallon water tank. Again, totally in support of fire suppression efforts because we're out in non-city water area. But there's also a couple auto body shops around us who, you know, probably should have triggered that water tank years ago. So I'm curious what the requirements are for the fire department to sign off on or inspect different businesses and career concepts than beyond cannabis. I definitely support suppression measures as we've all experienced fire in our lives in the county. So just curious about that.
So real quick, Chief Cepeda. So anything that comes across our, you know, if it's any change in occupancy, but we inspect, well, we hope to get every single permit that's out there. If it's no change in occupancy, it's a clothing store that's going to be a new clothing store or a thrift store, then there's nothing other than maybe just a quick life safety to make sure that those components are there. But when it's a new occupancy, you know, that does regulate a complete inspection. P&O Auto Body's been there for kind of forever. But where we come into is when we don't know about these permits being issued, then we can't do an inspection. And, you know, we found some by accident and trying to work with those business owners, but that's kind of why the connection of the Fire Marshals Forum is to just reconcile that we know everything that's going in and we're making sure that life safety component is being addressed. Exits, fire extinguishers, smoke alarms, all those things, evacuation maps. If they've hardened their buildings, we kind of know it's going to be an extra measure to gain access to. And then, of course, those water supplies. So that's kind of how we operate right now, is just trying to find everything that comes across our desk.
Thank you. I just wanted to add a little bit of clarification from Bart's comments. The city of Ukiah does not actually allow for on-site consumption yet. It's something that's going to the Planning Commission this week. I just confirmed that with the city of Ukiah's Community Development Department. It is, however, allowed in outside city limits. So that's all I got. Okay. Next, we'll go to Paul Bernaccio. Bart, why don't you go ahead and put your hand down, please, since we already called on you. And we'll go to Paul.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, Paul Bernaccio. I own the Highway Dispensary. I just wanted to voice my support for having people go through a minor or preferably a major use process for the retail sales. I definitely liked what Jennifer Smith said about opening up our zoning a little bit so that more places can qualify, because as we know, there's not a lot of places that actually qualify in Lake. And if we want to spread them out a little bit, I think that opening the zoning is a good idea. The major use permit as well. The conditions of approval are important to make sure that the businesses are acting the way that they're supposed to act. And we had a problem with that, like when it first went medical and people kind of opened dispensaries all over the bay and did whatever they want. It gives the neighborhood, the community, the opportunity to say something about it, and it gives the county the ability to address life safety issues. So that was all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Sarah, go ahead.
Hi there, this is Sarah Bodner, Policy Director for LCCA. And I want to add a little context to this discussion because I think what we've seen over the last handful of years since California legalized is that retail is declining and struggling, in part because of exactly what has happened here in Lake County, where it's been relegated to one very narrow zone. So you've got a few dispensaries on the same street and they're competing directly with their next door neighbors, but then there's a lack of access in other locales. And so what Jenna is talking about is it's not just happening in Lake. It was really common throughout the state, but this is a good time to revisit that plan and look at, could there be more locations in other business-friendly zones that would be appropriate to help spread it out. We wouldn't put all hair salons on one street or all coffee shops on one street. It just wouldn't make sense. And that's kind of the equivalent of what we have happening. So I think that by revisiting the zoning and looking at where else could this be appropriate, you could look at sort of a graduated discretionary review process where in some neighborhoods or some types of zones, rather, it would be more appropriate to have the most rigorous major use permit. And in others, looking at what's appropriate for that zone and how that zone applies to Lake County. And in terms of process, I can say that LCCA would be happy to do what we did with the drying structures language, which is come to the task force, at your next meeting with recommendations around what zones we might want to consider adding in for retail so that we can have a more diversified retail business environment, and then present that to the task force for input, because this is something we live and breathe and think about all day long. So if that would support us moving forward, we'd be happy to write that letter and then get input from the whole group next time. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Go ahead, Rebecca.
I think that if we are looking at changing zoning or zoning changes at all, that we might as well go with a discretionary minor or major use permit. I think that it probably creates more work for you and it's just messy to have different permitting types for different zones dependent on community and other qualifications as stated. I think that going with that higher level of permitting that would be more applicable to zones if they do get opened up would be more responsible from a workload standpoint and just from practicality.
Thank you.
Is there a mechanism in place if someone wanted to open a dispensary outside of a defined zone that they can apply for some kind of exception if, say, their location meets all the rules of the zoning that, it's not high school, it's not in neighborhoods, this and this and this. Possibly they could get I forget what the term is.
Variance.
A variance to the zoning. Is that a possibility or no?
No.
No.
And I'll tell you why. Variances do not apply to development standards. So even if all the criteria or all the regulations were satisfied, if it's not in the correct zoning district, the department would not be able to support the application.
I have a question.
Catherine.
Are there maps that show the different zoning districts?
Hey, Andrew.
Is it possible? So I mean,
that you could pull up?
Yes, give me 1 second.
Is why they were chosen as districts and others weren't, maybe?
I would be interested to see that because I know there's been some discussion about the concentration, but it seems to me just from the dispensaries that are in operation right now, you have 3 in Clear Lake, 1 in Lower Lake, 1 in Lucerne, 1 in Lakeport. So it seems like, some people have found a way to open dispensaries in all parts of the county.
In many parts of the county.
In many parts of the county, maybe not all parts, but, so I'd just like to see, I mean, what that, maybe an overlay of the dispos and the zoning map.
I mean, it won't be possible to, pardon me for jumping in, it won't be possible to like not have the concentration within the city of Clear Lake if the city of Clear Lake has determined that there could be up to 3 of them, right? I mean, that's up to their discretion and not part of our purview, but.
Right, and we wouldn't be discussing Lakeport either.
Right.
Or taking in that city's limits into our consideration.
Okay, and just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, since I both live and work in Lakeport, so the Blue Heron, whatever the dispensary in Lakeport is that inside, that is outside city limits presently?
It is just south of the city
though
limits.
There's obviously discussion ongoing about how to potentially move that line someday, but that's not pertinent to what we're talking about today. Just it is presently outside of the designated city limits.
Correct.
And that's zone commercial, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are the city of Lakeport's?
They have location limitation buffers.
Okay.
And storefront, I don't think they're allowing storefront yet. It was
In Lakeport?
Yeah, delivery.
Yeah, Lakeport does not currently, retail sales are banned in Lakeport.
Except for you can have delivery only. That's allowed. Just not a storefront.
Okay.
Yeah, no storefront.
So then it wouldn't make sense to me to hold the task force accountable for what city governments have
No.
the jurisdiction.
This is more just an aside within the concentrations around the county and so on and so forth. But
Yeah.
So let's go back. These are currently the zones where they are allowed. If you look at the bottom two, C1 and C2 is where you're seeing them most often. Planned development commercial gets a little tricky because it does say uses allowed in C2. However, you typically need a specific plan of development to accompany that, which is, and we use the tool of the major use permit. So it would actually be a major use permit in PDC as well.
Can I ask a question for Nara or Jennifer?
Sure.
Just briefly, Nara or Jennifer, I mean, I know you talked about formulating, or Sarah talked about formulating some type of formal recommendation, but off of the top of your head, which zones do you think would actually be beneficial to open up?
This is Jennifer. Andrew, could you go back to that zoning map?
Yes, it's not a comprehensive zoning map. I was just working on it right before the presentation. Didn't quite have time to get around to it. But what I've highlighted here, are you guys seeing it? The yellow represents C2, where it's a use by right. This kind of turquoise represents C1, where you would be required to have a major use permit. And then the purple would be PDC, which would also have to go through a major use permit. But as you can see here, this would be the Middletown area. This is kind of around Hidden Valley Lake. Got Cobb Mountain up in this area. Lower Lake. City of Clear Lake. This gives you kind of an idea. One thing I had hoped to do, I just did not have the time with everything else going on, would be to, identify those sensitive receptors and apply the 1,000-foot setback from them to see where that would leave a lot of these C1s and C2s, because a lot of those sensitive receptors are often right around these main streets that we're seeing. So that could kind of eliminate the ability to even pursue it there. And the Board of Supervisors has stated that, I think many of them have stated, I'm not sure if it's all of them, but that they want to maintain those 1,000-foot setbacks. But, one side effect of that could be that it drives future retail sales into, a micro business form, that vertically integrated, scenario that could help our cultivators. But it's just something that was crossing my mind as I was considering all of this. For a comprehensive zoning map, you can easily go to the Lake County GIS portal and see all the zones. But for here, they kind of all blend together in a bunch of colors, and they're highly saturated online. So I just wanted to kind of pull these out to make them pop out and see what we're looking at. So
Thanks. I was especially interested in the information I was looking for was actually in the memo. So I just pulled that up. But to answer your question, Rebecca, I could definitely at some point, if we're talking about the broader picture of retail sales, and as Andrew mentions that micro business, which applies to very few of the farms in Lake County because it does have a 10,000 square foot max canopy. But building upon that vertically integrated model, we definitely, we should look at some of the agricultural districts, the projects in ag zones, and where it might be applicable to have on-site retail sales. Going down the list off the top of my head, obviously we're going to stay away from anything residential. Would have to dig in more to PDR and PDC, but D1, C2, PDC planned development commercial. So, I think we really need to look at this list and see what's currently allowed in it and where we fit as just a natural retail. Like it's retail at the end of the day that we're talking about.
Yeah. If I can jump in here as well, it's, I would say what might be good would be to look at an overlay with where wine tasting rooms are allowed, because that's a retail use that's associated with an agricultural use, and it's not a commercial corridor. Some of those are tasting rooms. Most of them do have retail sales as some aspect of that. The other thought would be to allow for non-storefront retail for some of the supply chain businesses that are like the cultivators, processors, manufacturers here, to be allowed to deliver so that they don't have maybe customers coming on site, but are able to deliver. I'm thinking about like the area where I live in Hidden Valley and near Middletown, where that 1,000-foot setback makes it so that none of the commercial areas around here will be able to have a dispensary. So there won't be a they're just, you can't find 1,000 feet in Middletown unless you get way out of town. Same thing with Coyote Valley area as well. I think that was part of the little yellow and purple on Andrew's map there. So I think it would be about trying to find some parity with wine and with other tourist uses. So yeah, and I'm seeing Sarah's comment in the chat. The 600 feet is generally the more standard practice, particularly in commercial areas. So the 1,000 feet, sometimes when you have such a small commercial area, you end up with these kind of wild, tiny little strips of like one block where all the dispensaries are going to have to be. And that's, I think, the exact kind of concentration that the supervisors were concerned about. So I would love to see that that map with the restrictions applied. And I think we'll see how completely narrow that green zone is right now. So I hope that answers Rebecca's question. Is that?
Yeah, it did answer my question. I guess, just kind of what I was thinking is I was looking at the different zoning types, and I was just thinking, I think, many businesses are at a natural disadvantage as far as, having multiple businesses in one area because of how spread out the county is. But I was just looking at this list and thinking, maybe it wouldn't be the best business model to have people have a dispensary on, like in the back of Big Valley, on Big Valley Road, or like, Scotts Valley Road, or in Upper Lake, way out where the agricultural districts are. I just don't think that any of those areas would be beneficial to business. So I was kind of thinking, what zones would even make sense to open up?
I think it would be more, you're more focused in areas like that on tourist, so it would be like that destination, a training room, an elevated yoga class, an eco-tourist,
Right.
bed and breakfast kind of thing. That's the kind of thing that would fit back there, or delivery, right? Because, there's just not the kind of traffic, right, to warrant like just a standalone only.
And I think that those are the projects, we consider those retail still, but those are the projects that would go through a more stringent approval process. Because you're also like now you're opening up commercial space down roads that may or may not be 4290 compliant or off county roads. And
Right.
so it's a bigger process.
Yeah, that's just what I was thinking with regard to some of these other zoning districts. I was just kind of, I mean, obviously you'd stay away from residential, so I was looking at what would apply and thinking, those wouldn't be suitable for dispensaries. So with regard to dispensaries, I was just thinking it probably wouldn't be able to get more open than it is right now while still making sense from a business perspective.
Yeah, and the local jurisdiction can restrict in their in the local code here, where while they still be applying for the type 10, the retail license at the state level, the county could restrict, some of the activity on site further than the state would. It's just that the state just has these very specific license types. So if you're going to be selling cannabis, you have to have X license at the state. That doesn't mean that the county couldn't say, okay, well, you have to, they have to be a member, or they have to be a, whatever it is of that.
Right.
And I think it's given
Sorry.
the time. Sorry, I'd like to just kind of, reiterate that given the time, let's study, LCCA's always willing to study the zones and what's currently allowed and where it would match up and come back with some solid recommendations for the task force, and even, go to the sub ad hoc committee model again.
I don't know that we need an ad hoc committee. If I could just do a brief recap, since we're almost out of time for today, unless the task force wants to go long.
Can I just bring up one consideration? It was following up some of those comments on other zones. When I got here, I moved here from Colorado in 2021. And one thing we would often see there is that a lot of these dispensaries were located in a zone that would be similar to highway commercial zoning districts, which I just pulled up in this green section. And they're kind of a little further removed from Main Street and, where a lot of those sensitive community areas are. And since I've been here, I always wondered, why did Lake County not allow dispensaries or retail sales in these locations, especially in terms of like a delivery service? But anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there for consideration.
Okay, thanks. So what I'm hearing from everybody is, in general, there is consensus about making the permit discretionary. The level to which would be minor or major, could be dependent on zoning district. We definitely need to make sure that fire is kept in the loop, no matter what level. And LCCA would like is kind of looking at it a little more broadly, or a little more integrated. It's kind of they're looking at number 1 and number 2 of our task list together, with maybe making a recommendation of alternate zoning districts to be added to where retail is a use or a permitted use, and then dealing with the permitting question based upon the zoning district. I would prefer, I don't think we need an ad hoc committee on that one, but if LCCA could get it to us by the next meeting, that'd be great. If the task force is amenable to going in that direction. So let's get the voice of the task force on that one first.
I have one question.
Yeah.
We have the growers, we have the dispensaries. Where is it being produced into oil? Where is it being manufactured? Is it at the dispensary, or is it at the grocery?
No, that's at a manufacturer's license.
It goes off to another place and
Yeah.
comes back?
Just as the distributor is the one that has custody of the cannabis as it goes through the testing in the multiple stages. So the state has pretty much divvied every step of, the eking every last little bit out of cannabis into a whole bunch of different license types. So it's already kind of a cumbersome system, but that's what we got so far.
I mean, I think if there's consensus to recommend the discretionary use permit, I think that we could do that separate from our conversation on zoning. And I actually think that it should be separate from that conversation. I think that may be lengthier and include more public input. I think that's really what people are.
Okay, that's fair.
That would be my opinion.
Is the task force fine with then taking action on number 1 today, and then taking a look at a presentation from LCCA regarding the zoning and the location limitations at our next meeting?
So is that so essentially we're saying we would be requiring a minor or major use permit for any business, regardless of where they're zoned at?
If that's the motion,
Correct.
if that's the decision of the task force.
Do we need to vote or do we need to just reach consensus?
I don't see hands shooting up, so if somebody wants to make a motion on number 1, that is fine.
I move that we recommend to the Board of Supervisors that all cannabis retail locations require a discretionary major or minor use permit based on zoning.
Okay. Okay, we got a couple seconds. Task force, wait, before we go to task force, I got a number ending in 7257 with a hand up. Go ahead, public.
Yes. That's for me. Can you hear me?
Is this Bart?
Can we approve the motion first for the public comment?
No, we can't take action without getting that public input.
Okay, gotcha.
We can't hear anybody on 7257. All right, so we'll go ahead. We have a motion and a second.
Maria, real quick, this is Paul Blues. I just wanted to clarify because the radio was going off, so I missed that. Did Rebecca's proposal include for fire district sign off?
Well, fire district sign off would automatically be included in the discretionary permit process.
Okay, no, perfect. The radio was going off, so I didn't hear what it was for at all.
Yeah. No,
Okay, thank you.
All right, so all in favor of discretionary permit process?
Aye.
Okay, we got 4 ayes here. Do we have any? That's an aye from Jennifer. Any nays from the task force? Seeing no movement, we're going to consider that passed. Good. So now then the next one is consensus. What do we want to do with task number 2 on location? Location limitations or density?
I personally would like to see more information before making this. It'd be nice to actually have like a map, especially with, the setbacks mapped out, just a visual. And then, I don't know, could we recommend to open it up to other districts? Like if we see that, and it's like, wow, they're really limited, maybe we should look at other zoning districts that they could operate in.
If I can just speak to that too. I know on Andrew's map that like Kids Corner became like all of a sudden like a spot where this could occur if we were to shift the rules or look at this differently. That and that category of zoning seems to make a lot of sense, just given the landscape within
I think
the county.
Kids Corner is already allowed by right.
Maybe so.
One corner of Kids Corner, it has a use by right that is in the works at the moment. It would open up the other 3 corners of that intersection.
And I guess what I'm trying to point out is just that I'm not saying that the conversation around Kelseyville or other such zones isn't important, but I think we could broaden the landscape of where this could be possible and potentially reduce the amount of friction involved in making those tough decisions about other locales. If we could, I don't know, maybe I'm asking for something we already have.
No, not at all. I think that, if we wanted to then revisit number 2 at our next meeting, that would give Andrew time to make his totally cool maps and LCCA to present us with what they think would be reasonable.
Cool.
All right, so do we, look, I see nodding heads in the room. How about in the Zoom room? Anybody have objection to that being our next agenda item for next meeting? Which is in 2 weeks.
I agree.
I do want to bring up a point that the Board of Supervisors brought up, was the case of the approved projects that are already existing that may or may not meet any of these. They wanted to see those grandfathered in some mechanism. And obviously if you pass it, they would be grandfathered in as they exist. However, they're 10-year permits. So when it comes time to renew the permit, their future would be undetermined at this time, I guess. So something to consider.
Right. Yeah, typically when we change the rules on everybody, if you're already a permitted or entitled activity, we consider you a legal non-conforming use. So we follow the article in the zoning code that deals with, that regulates legal non-conforming use. So that's kind of like grandfathering, sort of. Okay, so I don't see anybody against that. That will become the agenda for our next meeting. And also one last thing for the task force. After we're done with this matter, what I'd like to do is for the agenda after that would then be to start looking at the new regulations the state has brought about and any recommendations on that, because I think that from the input that we've been hearing, that also has a level of urgency, even though it wasn't direction given to us from the board. Does that sound about right?
Yes.
Okay.
In the meantime, can we make some type of formal request that the board, allow us to work through the process as we were already
You
determined?
mean let us do what it is that they wanted us to do in the first place?
Yeah, I just think that, by taking on all of these little wildfires, maybe we work things out, and then as we continue to work through the ordinance, we have to kind of backtrack because we decided on something that had connectivity to something else, and we made a different decision there. I just think potentially, it continues to be not a waste of time, but,
The one-off, like a whole bunch of one-offs.
yeah, I just think we need to get back to our original collaborative, collective approach to addressing the ordinance.
I have already conveyed that to the board.
Okay, yeah.
And I convey it to them every time they come up to my office to ask about a new ordinance.
They all come at once. They all come at once.
No.
What we've got right now is sort of a hodgepodge of regulations all over the county, and
Yes.
we don't want to add more hodge or podge.
Exactly. However, that's why I'm asking the task force about the new state regulations, just because that can change a lot of things before this next season.
Absolutely.
And then we go back to what we were originally meant to do.
Right, okay.
Good. Okay.
Hello, this is Bart. I'm back in the room. I'm sorry I cut out.
Hey, Bart.
Thank you so much.
We're just about to adjourn. Do you have public comment?
Yes, I do.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm not hearing any acknowledgement that the town halls will be brought into the process and given a chance to weigh in about what they do and don't want in regards to dispensaries in their areas.
Bart, we have all of the town hall email addresses on our mailing list.
They have not been approached about this, Andrew, and they need to be, and they'd like to be officially
We send them each agenda.
included. I'm sorry?
We send them each agenda.
I know you send the agenda, but they are not officially informed or invited to the meeting, and they'd like to be, notified and have input about this particular thing.
Public comment.
Thank you, Bart. Since they are getting the agenda, they are totally welcome to join any meeting just like any other member of the public. However, they will not be given a seat on the task force because the board is the one that made those appointments. But thank you for your input. If there's no further input, we're going to go ahead and adjourn today's meeting. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.